As a data leader, I'd be on the phone to each of the leaders of those stakeholder groups: the CFO, the head of supply chain, the head of FP&A, the head of tax, head of customs, head of product.
Hi there, welcome to Trump's Tariffs, what data leaders need to know. I'm Nathan Jones and I'll be hosting today.
Bit of background on myself. I'm the founder and CEO of Calon Analytics. We're a analytics consulting and technology company based in Zurich. We help consumer and industrial goods companies make the most of their data end to end. I set up Calon last year, and prior to that I had 18 years in Deloitte, and I've been working for 25 years in the business analytics space. What we're going to cover today, I'm trying to give you a good overview of the current situation, what it means for businesses, and what it means for a data leader really to be valuable in this particular environment right now, and a view on what you could do next if I was you. But to start, we'll start with really what are tariffs. It's worthwhile just level setting on what they are. So tariffs and duties, the words are pretty much interchangeable. They're taxes applied by governments on the value of imported goods. So they're making products more expensive and less competitive compared to homegrown products. But also there's a way of controlling what particular goods come into a country. For example, most of you will have been to an airport and seen duty-free. When you go to those duty-free payments are away from the duties on alcohol, tobacco, and so on. What the US are doing with tariffs is very much about putting more of those duties, more of those tariffs on a wider range of companies, wider range of products than before. So the importer is going to pay the tariff via a bill. They'll get it from customs. It's from your importer, not from your distributor. There's usually the customs value is the baseline for most products. And there's two key areas that impact the rate. There's the product tariff classification, which is often known as the HTS code. This is per product, per good. And also the country of origin of the product. It's not the country of export, it's the country of origin. And that's what a lot of the noise in the news this last week has been about, looking at the different reciprocal tariffs between the US and the EU and China and so on. From a data leader's perspective, it's critical to get the data right for both the product itself and the country of origin of these products. Keep an eye on that as we go through this. And from a financial perspective, custom duties are above the line, so they affect directly the profit of the business, not like maybe income taxes, which are on your profits. Hopefully that gives a quick overview of what are tariffs. The current situation, everything's changing very rapidly. The end of last week, the US had obviously imposed these reciprocal tariffs globally. We've got the nation of origin tariffs plus different classifications on specific goods and products. There are certain across-the-board tariffs, including the 25% tariffs on cars, steel, aluminium, and there's a whole bunch of exempt goods. But then the latest situation, the tariffs on automobiles, steel, aluminium, remain. There's a 90-day pause currently on the nation of origin reciprocal tariffs. There's still some tariffs that are applying across the board of 10%. But the trade war has begun since last week. China tariffs from the US, so goods coming from China into the US are currently at 145. That was this morning. And China applied a 125% tariff on the US, and that's really recent, last couple of hours. So really, these things are moving quickly. The EU is looking at using the 90-day pause to negotiate what's going on. And there's still there's different setups for Mexico in terms of their tariffs. What does this mean for business? I think that you've seen a few different reactions. Some companies are pausing shipments to the US. Some companies are seeing a large cost impact, which in some cases, especially for smaller companies, is potentially life-threatening for the business. We're seeing already growth forecasts being slashed, for example, down in Germany. We're seeing builders and manufacturers of goods who are in the US looking at how they rearrange their supply chain in order to deal with the tariffs. Since then, the stock markets have been up and down. A couple of days ago, the FTSE 100 had been down a lot, now back up. It's moving again today. There's no predictability in that setup. So how are businesses responding? It's not simple. There's multiple factors. We've got very complex and interdependent supply chains. There's a number of topics around the globe already with conflict, risk of sanctions in play. There's the China, Taiwan, Russia, Ukraine, Middle East. There's various things going on. We need to deal with the impact of the current manufacturing locations, what contracts are in place between goods companies and their manufacturers, and also the impact of prices in the markets they're working with. And there's a few tactics that are happening. Cost reduction and working capital analysis is a no-brainer. It's going to happen. It's almost the go-to in finance to make things happen. Companies are thinking about what's our go-to-market. Are we really going to continue to serve tariff-compliant markets, or are we going to look differently? So there's a big pricing and profitability angle that we need to take into consideration there. From a manufacturing perspective, the product mix that you're making is absolutely crucial. If you're in the US, then companies are going to be reviewing, optimizing where manufacturing is happening, how it's contracted, and then your tax teams and so on are going to be working out the meaning of that. If you're outside the US, then if you think that the US is going to be a major target mid-long term, do you need to shift manufacturing into the US? How do you deal with these? So there's a number of different tactics that companies are going through. Each company will have its own way. We'll check in if there's any questions in the chat. Nothing at the moment. Let's maybe carry on and see if there's maybe 10, 15 minutes from to have another check on the chat. Please can subscribe and connect with me on LinkedIn so we can keep the conversation going. So let's get to the main part of this really, which is what's the role of the data leader if you want to be part of the solution. If you think your role as a data leader is, I've got to get all my company's data into an Azure data lake, for example, then that's probably not the right answer when you're trying to be part of a business solution. So we're really focusing on how data can help become a business solution here. The 90-day pause has ironically made it more important that data leaders are involved. If it was just immediately, then finance would have solved it. It would be going off on their own, doing everything. Now you've got the situation where data leaders have to get involved. They see the data across the organization, across supply chain, across multiple others, and should be playing a key role in this. There's 3 areas to focus on, and then I'm going to focus on what to do next. First of all, we'll run through the different people and stakeholders that data leaders should be engaging with. We'll talk about some key data elements that you need to be on top of, some of the key analytics use cases that are live here, and I'll give my view on what you should be doing in the next day or so and in the next 90 days in order to make the most of this. So, who are the main stakeholders? As a data leader, finance are probably one of your big stakeholders anyway. They'll continue to be running a lot of analyses in these areas. Supply chain, you're probably close to if you're in manufacturing or consumer goods. You're going to be already looking at the impact of inventory, of supply chain, of what's being made, who's buying, who's selling throughout. But there's a couple of other areas who you may not be as closely involved with, particularly tax and customs. I'd imagine you may never have even spoken to your customs guys before. And also the teams that actually manage your product are going to be really crucial. Starting with customs, I'd be very surprised if customs had not already established a task force around this. They're going to be needing to sort out what are the high-risk products, make sure that everything's classified. They're going to be at the center of this, especially from a management perspective. They'll particularly want to understand the impact of in-transit goods. So whether it's in your ERP or whether it's coming from some of your suppliers, that's going to be information you need to be working closely with customs on. They're a very key stakeholder. Finance is a key stakeholder. Product P&L and margin analysis is going to be a crucial use case for finance. Understanding the impact on working capital, understanding both your core product and customer portfolio profitability is going to be crucial. So data teams, analytic teams who are often integrating even more granular data than finance have. Finance are sometimes dealing with summary data, which doesn't always give you the most granular view and granular cuts. I think your data team is going to be really important in making this work. And then you've got other questions like price elasticity and, of course, cost reduction. I think if you look at finance teams or CFOs, if there's a challenge going on, then tightening the belt strings is going to be on the agenda. Be ready for this and start thinking how you can help understand where the costs are, how you can help get that data available to the finance teams to make that happen, because you'll show that you're really part of the solution there. Supply chain, I think obviously is going to be critical. Like I say, if you're a global manufacturer, you're probably very close to your supply chain, whether you're getting into, there's probably not so much S&OP anymore, but looking at the manufacturing footprint, looking at the risk areas, looking at where your suppliers are, looking at the types of contracts you have with their suppliers. The in-transit inventory part comes up again here, where we're looking at okay, what's our risk of the goods that are already on the way to the US, for example, from China? How much are you going to have to pay when they hit the US shore? There's a number of different tax elements, everything from customs duties, supply chain, transfer pricing, indirect or VAT, the elements of provisioning for tax in the future, as well as being part of the global response. Tax will be a major part of this solution. Get in touch with them quickly so that you can really address some of their challenges. It's a major topic, so be on top of it. Then finally, we'll talk at the product. So the people who own product master data are going to have quite a big role to play going forward, because it's not just the finished goods, it's also the materials. I believe that if 20% of the goods are made in the US, then there's some reductions in tariffs. Check that, that's not legal advice. But there's things to be aware of in terms of the bill of materials, how the materials come together, what the dependencies are, making sure that the origin of the materials and of the goods is actually specified is going to be crucial, especially as the trade wars are heating up and more tariffs are coming between China and the US, and we don't know what the EU is going to do. Then it's going to be really important to make sure that you've got that product data correct. The HTS is part of that. That's the International Customs Codes, probably something you may have not been too familiar with in the past, but something that you'll probably feel very comfortable with in 2 or 3 months' time and be all over it. The product also going to be looking at the alternative materials, and so on. I think then making sure that they're sharing that data internally. I think as a data leader, that's where you're going to be working very closely with those product teams. And then, so let's say, what about the data itself? I think master data, getting the master data right is going to be critical. In many cases, this falls under the head of data, and then in the chief data officer, sometimes it doesn't. If no one's taking responsibility as a data leader, you probably should be getting involved, even if you're not owning it. Some of the key data elements that you'll need to get right, like we said, the HTS classifications, the information that comes from the US in terms of calculations and documentations, understanding change history of products and documents, understanding what things are eligible or what things aren't. All this data is going to be really crucial at product level to make sure you got it right. Origin data is going to be needed by all the teams that you're going to work with as a stakeholder. So classification data similarly. So really make sure that data is available, shared. You've got a single trusted view of that data that you can make available to all parties. I think that's going to be crucial. The same with product engineering, same with cost data. The more you can streamline the provisioning of data, even if it's in Excel, to different teams from trusted sources that people know, that the more useful you're going to be as a data leader in this environment. Like, I was looking at what different data and elements and requirements we've got, and there's many, right? There's so many different elements that build up into the master data view of the product that leads to the element. And I'm not going to go through this in any sort of detail, but it gives you a feel for what sort of elements you and your team need to be on top of as a data leader. So going from the data itself to the analytics, I think there's 100 different analytics use cases, but prioritization is going to be absolutely crucial. I think these 6 are, in my view, probably the ones that data leaders are going to be called on to implement first. So working with finance on revenue, the margin, and liquidity modeling, being able to forecast that. So working closely with either you're going to be providing more data to your FP&A teams, or you're going to be working to build models, to build more complex models maybe than your FP&A teams can do. Similarly, you're already probably doing some customer behavior modeling and forecasting. We're going to be very likely to be building new assumptions into those new price points. So expect that there's going to be different models that you want to build around those customers. The previous behavior pattern and price pattern isn't going to be as valid as it was before, so you're going to have to start making different assumptions and dealing with that. Be aware of that. The distribution network analysis is really crucial, because knowing where your goods are in the supply chain, especially if they're in different countries, that's going to be quite a big point. Also, the cost of moving things between the different networks, these are going to be pretty crucial. So get in touch with your supply chain guys around that. We've touched before on in-transit inventory risk and impact. If I was to do one thing, that'd be making sure I've got a report by Monday on what's actually in transit right now and when you're going to hit, because keeping that up to date, making sure that what you're going to have to pay when your goods hit landfall in the US or in China, for example, especially going from 10% up to whatever percent, that's a big financial impact on the organizations. Definitely be looking at that. And fulfillment cost modeling, you're going to also be looking at the potentially different shipping patterns, different trades. That's going to come on board with changes in your distribution. If you're using new warehouses, new suppliers, those predictions, the cost modeling for that is going to be pretty big. And if you're changing materials or changing manufacturing locations, then working on cost modeling around that, I think, is going to be a crucial use case for analytics teams in particular. And then let's think about what would we do next. So if I was doing this right now, this is what I would be doing in the next hours. As a data leader, I'd be on the phone to each of the leaders of those stakeholder groups. So I'd be on the phone to the CFO, the head of supply chain, the head of FP&A, the head of tax, head of customs, head of product, and what did we get in the diary for them in the next few days, even over the weekend, to make sure that we can understand what their needs are right now. Really get to grips with what are their priorities, what's the data that backs that up. On the flip side, I'd be looking at my current in-flight projects. In particular, I'd be looking at my in-flight projects, which ones can be parked for a week or two, or for a month or two, so that I can refocus on this specific need right now. I've got a full book of work, my teams are busy, but I know I'm going to need to reprioritize some things here. So I'd be doing that as a plan. I'll need to manage some comms with the stakeholders maybe, but once I've done that, I can get a list of the maximum 10 analytics initiatives, data initiatives that support the highest priorities from finance, from supply chain, from tax, from product, and from customs. Great, and I'd work with those leaders to create a parity-level business case and then do the stakeholder management thing. I'd knock them against current book of work, take the proposal to the CEO and the CFO, and I'd get that approval to shift priority so that we can move into supporting the teams who need data at this really crucial point of time. Then from there, we'd plan a 90-day sprint, how to get this all together, and then how do we execute this over the coming weeks, coming months, in order to get the organization into a clear, strong, data-driven ability to respond to the tariffs. Crucial question here is, you need to become a key part of the response as a data leader. You need to make this an opportunity for data to make a difference in the response to the tariffs. Wrapping up, so just to recap everything, tariffs are basically like dookies. They're paid for by the importer. They're based on the type and the origin of the goods. Currently, US is 10% on everything. I think it's even 100, I haven't updated this one, 145 on China. China's gone reciprocal on the US. Everything else is paused 90 days for the reciprocals, but we need to deal with that. Companies are pausing shipping. There's an impact on in-flight exports. There's no clarity on what's happening right now. It's not a simple solve. You need to understand the supply chain. You need to understand what's in flight. You need to be planning for cost reduction. And as a data leader, you really need to connect to the supply chain, connect to finance, connect to tax, customs, and product to make this a solution. And what you're going to do next, you're going to speak to those people and you're going to reprioritize your book of work, get the CEO on board, and then make a difference, particularly in the next 90 days. Thank you for that. In the midst of chaos, there's also opportunity. If you want to follow me on this, please like and subscribe to this. Please follow me on LinkedIn. You can find us at calonanalytics.com and email me at nathan@calonanalytics.com if you'd like these slides. I've got a question in here from, what are the top 3 priorities which address volatility and address longer term? Yeah, so what are the 3 priorities that address volatility and address long term? In my view, this is going to be really understanding the profitability and pricing, making sure that, so that's going to be absolutely crucial. Making sure that you've got really good master data on your products, I think, is going to be crucial. Without the shadow of doubt, if you haven't got that, then you're really going to struggle to make any good decisions on this. And finally, the other longer term priority is enabling those connections within your organization by making your company a more data-driven response to the tariffs. you'll show them that the working together through and using very good data will actually help improve the supply chain in the longer term. I'd say those would be the two specific, and one is the more cultural element. But yeah, profitability and margins, product master data, and creating those connections that create that longer term value, especially for expecting a more prolonged trade war. Any other questions? Yeah, thank you. In that case, thank you very much for taking part. Thank you very much. This will be up on YouTube very shortly, and you can look back into it and have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.